Let me present. Okay. Or if you want to present.
Sure.
Yeah, now you can take over. Now I'm presenting. Today, we have 3 items in the agenda. First one is the reviewing again the security and network team. Review the issue of I think the permissive mode for their mutual TLS communication. And the second one is from our team. We have a proposal for serial namespace selection improvements. We want to get the feedback from the community. The third one is custom root CA for GWKS URIs. I think this one is proposed by the community, and we can discuss that. Also the plans for 1.3.
Yeah, okay. Just I want to know what's going to happen.
Okay.
Because we are going to freeze in about 4 weeks.
Right. Okay.
So just
sure.
I'm going to listen.
Yeah. So let's move to the first one. We're reviewing again the security. I think Jianfei and DM, your
I think
go ahead.
Focus on the GVC. You guys have some proposal, and do you want to start from there?
I think we discussed this before. Is there anything new, or have we made some progress?
We went to the TOC meeting, and we think this needs to be is a valid use case that we need to support. And here we are now discussing the real technical specifics of how to support that.
Could somebody share the design doc so we could all get the context?
The design doc is linked on the security agenda meeting notes.
Or then perhaps the meeting notes would be good.
This one, yeah.
Thank you.
Josh, can you see that now?
1 second. It's probably my problem at this point.
Oliver is now presenting.
I'm presenting, but if you want to take over, that's fine.
Can you summarize the problem first? I mean, it's anyone.
Can you explain?
Do you folks from Yahoo? Do you want me to explain, or you can explain?
We can go over it.
Yeah.
So, primary use case is to have support for indicating whether it should be the Envoy sidecar which terminates an MTLS request that's coming in, or it should be delegated to the application. So currently with permissive mode, I think the understanding is that mostly it's the application which is supposed to terminate it. And one way to identify whether it's a MTLS call or not is using the ALPN protocol. So the reason we brought this up was that we have a lot of external clients that are not part of the mesh, and they are not able to pass an application protocol as Istio. So as a result, they by default fall into the second filter chain in a permissive mode, and the connection is not expected to be MTLS and it's passed on to the app. So what we want is that regardless of whether the client is within the mesh and it's an Istio client or it's outside the mesh, we want the ability for Envoy to be able to terminate the incoming MTLS request and not give it to the application.
And to clarify a bit here, the Istio, Envoy has ability to detect if it's MTLS or not MTLS and to forward to the application. In reality, what the requirement was that if an application should be able to terminate MTLS if they want, because some application terminate MTLS and need to be able to continue to terminate MTLS.
Yep.
We want, if application is doing plain text, obviously we want to work, and you are adding the requirement for application to not terminate MTLS and void to terminate MTLS instead.
Right.
That's right.
And everyone agrees that it's a very reasonable use case and we want to support it.
Yeah.
So
Everybody agrees it's a valid use case. We need to support it. The
Yeah.
one question is about, okay, how do we differentiate? How do we say that this particular call should be terminated by a sidecar or should I pass it to an application? Okay, where do we add that flag to differentiate these two? So that's a question, technical implementation, which we are here for discuss.
And,
Yep.
and I think the proposal, one proposal, there are several proposals on, actually you can scroll down probably.
Oh, can you scroll down?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. Yeah.
So somewhere we need to specify that an application, where to terminate MTLS. So the fundamental question is where do we specify who terminates MTLS and what kind of proxy it is. And one proposal is to extend strict permissive apparently. I put in the comments, another option is to extend the sidecar API to define how it is set. And yet another one is to use annotations or other mechanisms, I suspect.
I mean, there are many ways. These are three things that you're looking for. Yeah.
So should we then discuss the pros and cons for each option then?
I have a question. In the use case that you guys are working in, do you want it to be strictly MTLS, or do you actually want it to be permissive, where it'll accept plain text connections as well? Because that was like the original meaning of strict and permissive. Permissive being that it would accept plain text or MTLS. Do you actually, yeah, which do you want for this use case?
We want permissive, where, because this is going to be a clients who are outside, and there are few clients we not have. We want a based approach to adapt and then make mutual TLS. So we want that to be permissive.
Okay, so you'll still have some clients that are plain text.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
So and the related question is, do you want the server to request client certificates, or do you want an option for the clients to not request? Because every time a client connects, the server decides, I want to client certificates and send a packet or not. So if a browser connects, for example, you'll see a pop-up every time the server is asking for a client certificate. Do you want to customize this as well or not?
I don't think they want to customize, but because it's MTLS, but they can confirm.
I think in permissive mode, we're fine with there not being an explicit request for client certs. If the client has adopted MTLS and is passing client certs, then we expect that the Istio authent filter will still be able to set the principal, and that part will still work, but it shouldn't be mandatory for client certificates to be passed.
So what I'm getting is, do we want to have a way to customize sidecar to specify pretty much, hey, I want to have MTLS or TLS. I want to have, I don't know, different policies. I mean, is it just strict permissive and enum case, or is it a more refined set of options? I mean, maybe you want to specify the LPN protocols that are exposed, are negotiated because some clients need this. Is it something that we can fit into an enum, or is it something that should use a proper API to configure the TLS termination at networking level?
I mean, I think at this point, we're just doing it as a migration path, so customization, we're fine as long as in our permissive mode, there are clients which can talk on plain text, TLS or MTLS. Any of the three should work. And we want Envoy to actually do the termination. So we won't be, we would prefer not to have ALPN negotiation, because again, that would be something which our clients would need to specify. So we don't want to have like a special ALPN like Istio or something like that.
No, I mean, what LPN is exposed by the server, because some protocols require the server to say, hey, I'm H2. For example, if it's gRPC, it expects H2 to be specified. It seems that in your proposal, you hardcode the H2. But there are other protocols that require other strings to be specified in as a server. So if Sidecar is terminating TLS for external application or Istio applications, all those factors need to be discussed, because you have a TLS client connecting to a Sidecar.
True. I mean, right now, I think we've been living with the fact that I think the ALPN protocols are either H2 or HTTP 1.1. I think both are allowed. So
Yeah.
most of our clients seem to support that. So we've not seen the requirement to customize that option further.
Yeah, but other people might. I mean, if it's an API change we are making, we should consider probably.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there will be some value use cases, yes, for other
Yeah.
clients who are using this model. Yeah.
Okay, I think this proposal makes sense. Do you think that doesn't make sense?
Oh, sure, yeah, but I think we haven't touched where to add this API yet.
Yeah, I mean, the proposal as written is to make it a new enum in the authentication policy, and it doesn't actually sound like this is an issue around authentication.
Exactly.
Right. This is an issue of whether or not TLS is terminated at the sidecar, and so I'd rather keep those concepts independent in our API.
I agree.
Okay.
I want to point out that we already have the gateway API already has the definition for customizing the TLS protocol per endpoint. So in the networking APIs, we have way to specify if we should request certificates, what private key to expose, subject alternative names, a protocol version of TLS, cipher suites to expose. So we already have a mechanism to fine-tune how TLS is terminated at the gateway level.
Okay, so if not for authentication policy, what's the alternative? Where we are proposing to add this?
The sidecar API.
Sidecar
Right.
API as well, yeah.
What is the so what is the cardinality mapping for the sidecar API versus authentication policy?
The sidecar is configuring how a particular sidecar works. So you can specify a particular port, what kind of settings you want to expose, what ports are exposed, how you configure whatever things it's.
Is that so? Is using if I remember correctly, it's using workload selector and selects certain of the deployments, and just want to make sure we can do one-to-one mapping between the sidecar API versus.
Yeah, sidecar applies to a particular workload. You can select a workload or you can select a namespace. Okay,
so the logic then will be if the mode is permissive, and we look at the sidecar API corresponding these workloads corresponding sidecar API to see if these settings has been set. Then we change the filter chain match to BTS transport protocol TLS rather than ARP and Istio. Does that sound what you're proposing?
I think it's part of. I mean, 90% yes.
Okay.
The question is if a user goes to configure just at the sidecar level and fine detail how MTLS is to behave, I think we can have the sidecar also specify if it allows TCP proxying. I mean, if it enables this sniffing and lets TCP go through as one of options in the sidecar API itself. So if users use this new API, this extension of the sidecar to fine-tune the sidecar, then they probably don't need to deal with permissive versus strict. I mean, that's an option. Hey, I want this.
Well, I know it's technically possible, but I just think we already have authentication policy and customers are getting used to using it.
Yes, they'll keep using it.
It's then I don't know.
Complex.
I know as a user probably folks on the GVC is proposing these solutions. You guys can provide some comments in terms of the user experience, whether which is less more straightforward if you want to deal with two CRD versus one CRD in a single place.
I just had one question. So if there is no policy created, then would that particular field in sidecar make sense? Like, what if there's no authentication policy for this particular application, and then because are we tying two sort of resources together now, or?
Yeah, that's
right.
Great question. That's the things that I worry about. Where if there are you put it in two different places, then you have unmatching or not found those kind of problems. And
I want to kind of revise my earlier statement. I guess I don't necessarily have a problem with this being part of authentication policy, but I don't think that like the ALPN is the same thing as strict versus permissive.
Exactly.
Like
I agree.
we could say it's permissive and then add additional fields that say,
Yes.
okay, well, what's the ALPN that you're going
Right.
to use and stuff like that. And that feels like, that's reasonably described as authentication policy, right? You're
Yes,
configuring
yes.
how TLS is going to be terminated,
But it's also network policy.
or how
But
TLS is going to be interpreted anyway.
yes, but this is also network policy. So configuring TLS is clearly a networking concern, and we already do it for gateway. And
Well,
again,
this TLS of course is both security and networking, but I think from the use case that we are coming from is trying to enable MTLS, roll out MTLS gradually, which I feel I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, from networking perspective, configure. I mean, I think it is very reasonable for MTLS to be configured in the networking APIs. That's again consistent with what we are doing for gateway.
I think that we need to get away from this idea of like networking APIs versus other kinds of APIs. They're just APIs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sidecar is not a networking API. Sidecar is a way to configure a sidecar for all purposes. It's not intended, and gateway is not necessarily networking versus. It just happens that was discussed and adopted in the networking working group. It's not a result to use networking terms. So,
yeah, but I mean, like there are a lot of settings that affect things that are on sidecar. So, yes, this is we're changing the behavior of a sidecar, but that doesn't mean that the sidecar API is necessarily the right place for it.
Yeah.
That's something that again TOC and the config will need to resolve because
do we have a kind of statement or other documentation from the TOC about what the sidecar API is supposed to be about? Like what are the limits on kind of what you're supposed to be able to configure in the sidecar API? Because like I said, basically every knob that you touch everywhere affects sidecars, right?
Yes.
So
right.
The sidecar API, what is that supposed to do? What is it supposed to mean?
What is supposed to go there? What does not supposed to go there?
My understanding is that anything that is supposed to touch a sidecar configuration can go into the sidecar API. Just like anything that configures a gateway can go into a gateway API. I don't think there is definitely not a restriction that some settings should be only networking, or for example, export to, which controls who is allowed to import a particular service. That can be translated and should be enforced as an authentication authorization policy.
Yeah, but like, let me give you an example, Kostin.
Okay.
If I create a service entry, right, completely different API, like when I do that, what will happen is that some piece of sidecar config will be created, right? There'll be a cluster created for it on the sidecar. So like, I don't think that we want to get in the business of people like using the sidecar API to like start creating extra clusters, right? Like we say the service entry is the way that you do that.
For outbound, yes. For sidecar, you just need to import the particular cluster. So in sidecar, you just specify that you are going to use the cluster. Yes, that's perfectly correct.
What I mean, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that like not every piece of configuration delivered to the sidecar should be configurable by the sidecar API, and we need to answer the question of what is like strict versus permissive already, right?
Yeah.
That affects sidecar configuration. So we don't want to re-implement strict versus permissive on the sidecar API. That'd be really confusing. So how do we know where this configuration should live? Should it live on the sidecar API or should it live on authentication policy? Is that like for this group to decide, or does that need to be kicked to some other authority like the TOC?
I think there is a simple way to decide that. I mean, assuming that you do not care about authentication policy or security. You still want to, I mean, you're a user who just...
No one falls into that category if they've turned on TLS.
But they didn't turn on
They care about security if they've turned on TLS.
Right, yes.
But if they don't turn TLS, then they still may have a reason to customize TLS settings.
We can wait until that reason pops up. I mean, this is of course a valid use case. If user want to dig into more low-level API, we can add support that later. But at this moment, we have a use case right now on the sitting on the GVC, and I want to get into Istio.
Yeah, so your use is perfectly valid, and I think we agreed. So basically, the question is, so there is, from networking point of view, I believe, this is a networking concern and should be configured using the Sidecar API. Apparently, there is a belief that the authentication policy should be expanded to cover networking concerns. I think that's something that we will need to, discuss in the networking working group as well, because I'm just a representative, I'm not the entire working group. And if the networking working group believes that TLS settings should be in authentications, and done. Otherwise, TOC will probably need to be involved, I suspect, no? I don't think we can make, if it's a setting that is falling between working groups, both working groups need to be involved, and the TOC as well, for figuring out the particular, and the config usability and so forth. It's definitely not a single working group concern. Am I correct, or anyone believes that it's strictly authentication and networking is not involved in this?
I don't know. Josh, do you have some comments?
Yeah, I don't know either. I'm a little dismayed that we're getting so policy heavy here. However, if anyone can say that they have a concern and bring it up to the TOC. So if there is a disagreement between networking and config working groups, anyone from the networking working group can object and bring it to the TOC. It would be better if we can resolve this ourselves and not take it there in the first place.
Well, I guess my point is that, like, this is a question of, like, API design, right? How do we decide what lives where? And so, like, we can just sort of talk about it between the networking and security working groups if that's the way that we go. I think it would be helpful for us to have a reasonably kind of sharp definition of what each of the API objects that we have are for, so that people can analyze, okay, well, I need to do this thing. Where should it live?
As a practical suggestion, what if we nominate one person from networking, one person from security to come up with a joint proposal?
I'm not entirely sure how it will go, because it seems that the fundamental disagreement is that the API should be either in, we agree on what should be in the API. There are TLS settings that need to be configured. The disagreement is this setting should go into the Sidecar API, or they should go into the authentication policy API. So if TLS settings should be defined by authentication policies, or should be defined by networking.
I think in terms of speaking from the user who proposing this use case, that we already went to the TOC. My intention as a TOC by that time is exactly trying to resolve the some configuration API where it lives where this kind of problem.
I don't think the TOC answered that. I think the TOC said that this was a valid use case, but left it to working groups to decide exactly how we instantiate it.
Josh, you're absolutely right. I haven't finished myself yet. It's just maybe by the time we don't have enough people to resolve the problem, and at that time that we went back to security working group, and sure, we can go back to a TOC meeting again, but that just seems a lot of back and forth.
That's why I proposed one person from security, one person from networking. Try to resolve this. If they can, great. If not, go back to the TOC.
Can I just add one small comment here? So I added a link here into the comment. If you want to follow this link, can we at least agree on so there is an API already defined for configuring TLS settings. Can you click on the second link? Actually, the second link is better. It's going directly to. So we have an object defined already and in use that defines TLS options for gateway. Can we at least agree that wherever it lands, we will reuse or extend what we define for gateway? or do you want to reinvent another stuff? I mean, those are settings that are currently in use.
This gateway setting,
because they're beta basically. So
they don't need that much private keys, so on and so forth. I think all they need is the one option to switch from ARP and Istio to transport TLS. It can be a Boolean or something else.
Another way of approaching this is Louis Ryan will be back in vacation in a week and a half. He's already working on this better default networking simplification. We could just bring this to him.
Yeah, I think Louis may have most contacts and authority on this. But they may delay the discussion of this. But if this is an API change. If we get it wrong, it's gonna be painful. So I think we wait a week and a half. I definitely agree.
I agree with that. But the OS team, are you okay with that? We
guys, sorry we're being so officious on this. It's a necessary evil, I think.
Well, for us, it's back and forth, and we are open to even contribute if as long as you tell us where you want us to, right? And we are just waiting to a system where we want to see the sidecar area, we will do it there. We are open to help fix that, while we are waiting for the direction also.
So I can propose a short-term solution for you. I think in general, the agreement in Istio is that we are using for things that are API, and they take a long time to discuss and approve. But we have used annotations and labels to enable features that are not yet API ready. Pretty much what you need here is to define a small annotation or label on the workload, and a small change in pilot to generate the corresponding config base. And that we do consistently for a lot of features where an annotation, which is not yet an official API, is used to customize what pilot is generating. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't put an annotation on the workload that needs this particular behavior and pilot to generate the configs that you want.
Then in the future, we need to deprecate that.
Of course, all APIs are by definition experimental and will be replaced by
extra work. Okay.
That is fine. Only concern I feel is that the annotation is determined at deployment time, and policy for changing from permissive or strict or from plaintext to permissive is changing on the fly dynamically. I don't know if that means you guys use case. I don't know if you are okay with this proposal using annotations. I don't know.
The annotations are applied to the service or to the deployment?
No, to a workload. So the workload, all the annotation applied to workload are passed to pilot, and we use many annotations to customize the behavior of pilot. SDS, for example, is going to use some labels on the workload and many other things.
We can apply to service.
Yeah, can we hear the opinions from them?
Yeah, so the point out there is like, hey, when we want that kind of dynamic where we want to turn it on and off, right? Now it triggers us to do a complete redeployment of our workload.
Yes, that will be the limitation until the API is ready.
Yeah, so I mean,
maybe it would work if we had the annotation on the service.
It has to be in the workload. Annotation on the workload are the ones that are used to generate the inbound configuration.
Or is it true that you have to redeploy though? Can't you change annotations on the fly?
Yes, I probably Kubernetes does it allow to change the annotations on the fly without recreating.
What I'm saying is that the current implementation of annotation and passing annotation to metadata and to injector and all the other stuff, that will be a major change too. So not in foreseeable future.
I see. It depends upon where the annotation is. Like if the annotation is under the spec, it has to redeploy.
I see. Yeah.
All right.
It is on the spec, I believe.
And one extra comment here in your second part of the document where you describe adding an extra filter, I put some comments there that is probably not necessary. You basically just need to remove the APN. So if this option is enabled, wherever it is, you don't need to add another filter. You just need to remove the Istio, label Istio and LPN negotiation, I believe.
If you remove, then let me understand this one, right? We want a scenario where we also have clients who are outside as well as who are in the mesh too, right?
Yes.
We want a sidecar which now the application forecast ALP, and then on the server side it rejects that, then because I don't see that anymore passing a
Yes.
Both the world works.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's my understanding. So I believe that if you just remove the label Istio, the Istio LPN stuff from the you don't need to add another filter with just protocol TLS. You just need to remove the first one. It's simpler.
Yeah, you don't need to do that. Yeah, I agree.
It's a simpler implementation. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Like, that's why our original question from 3 weeks ago saying that why did we add that LPN protocol at Istio?
Yeah, exactly. You need it only if you want the application to terminate TLS. So if you want the old behavior, you add that thing, and then application terminates TLS. Or if you want to terminate TLS in Envoy, you just remove it.
Okay, sorry. I think we have just to remind the timer that we have 3 more proposals, and we have 20 more minutes left.
I just want to make sure what's the AI.
Yeah, to summarize, we propose a short-term workaround, and we need to consult join with networking and API teams to see where this configuration lives as an official API.
Yep.
Okay.
And then next networking POC, we can discuss it as well from networking perspective. And please join.
Okay. So I'm fine with that. I know it's kind of delaying our work as well as one thing is like, can you document here the short-term solution we're talking about?
Okay, sure. Okay, I can I can document it and add you, Costin or you guys once I'm done with that. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. All right.
And then, like from now on, like that's fine. We have to look into that short-term solution and see what it takes for us to do that one, right? And from now to get this into a final stage, who's owning this? Like, who's going to take this to closer? Do you want us to do that? It's like between you, security group, and network team, sort it out, and then tell us that you come to an agreement where it has to be.
For now, I think maybe we need 2 person each from one team to drive this, right? Because we're still not sure.
I can be the point of the contact.
Yeah.
Before DM is coming back from vacation. Yes.
And maybe Costin from the networking team can.
Yeah, I Costin
represent the networking side. Yeah.
All right.
Because we don't know which API we are going to implement.
Sounds good. Can we moving on?
So can we like just to get it closer, right? And not next week, the following week, whenever we have this meeting, we will have a quick rain check on then where we are with this.
Sorry, I missed that part.
What's that question?
Like not next week, the following week, same day when we meet again, we will see where we are, what progress we have made between you and.
Okay.
So that will be 2 weeks later. So he's saying, can we have some progress on this? What's the?
But I don't think Louis. I don't know when Louis is back. Josh, do you know? Like.
We'll try to make some.
Sorry,
progress.
week, 1 week and a half. So yeah, if the 2 representatives can make progress on their own, great. Otherwise, we just have to wait for Louis.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, let's move to the second one. Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's move to the second one. Who's going to present?
Sam is going to present this.
Yeah, I'll be presenting this one. Can you guys hear me pretty well?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll move through this as quickly as possible. So just introduce myself. My name is Sam. I'm interning with John Fay on the Istio team at Google. And what I'm going to do today is just put forward some discussion on how Citadel targets which namespaces it should actually be operating on. So this is the design doc. If we could pull up the design doc really quickly on the...
Sam, are you presenting?
Yeah, I can present.
Or you can, sorry, I'm messy.
Already.
Can you, okay.
Already.
Yeah, I've got it, I think.
All right.
You guys seeing this?
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Cool. So yeah, just to start on like what the state of how this works now. Pretty much there are 2 flags. One of them is listen namespaces. And what listen namespaces does is you pass it a list of namespaces you want Citadel to operate on, and it's just like set at launch, and you can't really configure it after that point, and Citadel won't even receive updates about things happening in other namespaces. By default, it's blank, and it gets updates from every namespace. So the other flag you can use to configure which namespaces Citadel operates on is explicit opt-in, and that was added in like 3 months ago by IBM. And pretty much, if you have explicit opt-in enabled, then it'll check for the presence of this Istio enabled label on the namespace before it like generates a secret from a service account creation. So that's kind of the current state of the world. There's like those two different flags, the way they interplay together isn't necessarily entirely clear. It's also not really documented currently.
One quick comment. Normally we don't, users are not exposed to flags. Users are exposed to install options in values.yaml. Do you know where this namespace is exposed today? I mean, if it's not documented in the values.yaml, probably doesn't exist for users.
Yeah, that's a good. That's a part of their drawbacks of existing.
In values for a global or in Citadel?
It's under. I think it's under Citadel's values.
It will be worth mentioning this because that's what users typically do. I mean, documentation, everything for user is helm install minus whatever.
Right. Yeah. So it comes from the values and then gets passed as the flag into Citadel.
Yeah, it's passed on. That's
yeah. So yeah, we're just putting forward a few different alternatives to what it is now. So initially this was in order of preference, but there's been a lot of discussion. So I'll just list them as equal proposals. So the first one is to have a label. Initially we were going to make it citadel.istio.io like /managed and then have it true or false. I know that Costin, I think you brought up a concern about that.
Yep.
And then we were going to always follow what the label said. So pretty much the label trumps all the other configurations. If the label is present, we follow what the label is telling us. And if the label is not present, we're going to use another flag that we introduce. Unlabeled namespaces managed, or maybe a better name that says what to do in the case the label isn't found. Yeah.
To explain my concerns here, for auto injection, we follow the same pattern. And for the new installer, we have exactly the same pattern, where the goal is to allow a namespace to specify which injector to use, which control plane to use, and in this case, what CA to use.
Yeah.
In the past, we had a Boolean injected or not for injector, and that obviously doesn't work very well when you have multiple injector profiles and multiple versions of the injector running. Right now, Citadel is the only component in Istio that is singleton. You cannot have two Citadels running a system. You have two control plane, two pilots, two injectors, two telemetry, traffic shifting, and all kind of stuff except for Citadel.
So, Costin, if I understand correctly, are you proposing to change the value of this label rather than true or false?
Exactly.
Instead, point to a CLDL addressing of the CLDL, a particular CLDL service or in a particular namespace addressing. That's what you're.
The pattern used for injection is that you have a label on the namespace that specify which injector you want to use, and we specify it by specifying the namespace where the injector is running as a conversion.
Sure.
If you want canary, injector canary, you put a label Istio injector canary, and it will know automatically to pick up that.
I see.
And in fact, it can be a URL because SDS is also coming, and with SDS, it's probably desirable for namespaces to customize what SDS servers they are going to use or which instance of SDS, assuming that there are multiple instances of Citadel.
Okay.
So is that the general direction that we are going to move for like those features, such as this one, which is using the labels on the namespace to enable like whatever feature that you want?
For injector, that has been the case since 0.6 or
right.
so.
Injector, yes. And also for others.
For the multiple control plane and the new installer, that's the only way that we know because it's tied to injector. In order to support multiple injectors, we need to use labels because there is no other way to hook in the injectors. The main question I have is if we want to have 10 annotations, one for each component, or do we want to have a single annotation that is defining an environment, and then the environment will consist of a set of control plane components, because Citadel, again, it's one part of Istio and there are many other parts. So do you want users to have...
I think we should have multiple annotations.
I'm
like
okay
trying
with
to
both.
define a single annotation, then you have to like set an API for that, and then how do you like coordinate between the different things?
Adding to that, I think the use case that we heard, at first I have to say the multiple control plane and canary is one use case that we definitely need to support. The other use case we found is some users are just install Citadel, only Citadel in a particular namespace, and using for some purpose, not full Istio. And then they have some other namespace that use the full-fledged Istio installation. So in that case, if you put a single label on Citadel only namespace, that sounds a bit weird.
Yeah.
Actually, before we go much further on sort of critiquing option A, can we get through the rest of the options?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's option A. I won't give pros and cons since I guess we'll discuss that afterwards. So the second option was passing through a Kubernetes selector. So pretty much the operator can define a rule on which namespaces he wants to target, he or she wants to target. So maybe you have prod and staging, so you could have the selector select namespaces that are tagged with that. So you have a little bit more options to customize exactly how you want it to select namespaces, make it a little bit more dynamic.
Does anyone need this flexibility really?
I don't really know. Yeah, I'm not too tuned in.
My concern with this is, again, if when we move to SDS, the first option will be friendly for SDS. You will allow you to be able to specify which SDS server to use or which CA to use. This one definitely doesn't.
Yeah, I think it introduces a lot of operational complexity to force them to come up with a Kubernetes selector to do that.
Implementation is more complicated.
Yeah. So that was the second option. The third option is probably the most rigid. So right now we have the listen namespace flag. So something kind of similar, but that lets us do a blacklist as well. So we have a whitelist flag for namespaces that we would like to target, or mutually exclusive. You can't set both of these at the same time. A blacklist flag, which by default will target every namespace except for the namespaces you include in the blacklist. So that's the third option.
For the third option, first of all, for value, since that's why I asked the question about values.yaml, typically we want to maintain backward compatible. So, and I don't see any reason to replace instead of add. So we have listed namespace, which is a whitelist. If it is not specified, I have no problem with adding a blacklist to means that everything except those. Right. But it doesn't require a backward incompatible change.
Right. So I think that the plan is anyway to phase out the listen namespaces flag entirely.
But if you add namespace white, the flag, I'm not concerned with flag, I'm concerned with values.yaml settings. How is the user inter flags, whatever. That's but anyway, so in terms of values.yaml, we can preserve the existing whitelist, which is a whitelist effectively, and just add the blacklist to get the behavior you want without breaking the user.
Yeah. So I think on the implementation side, it's slightly different in that so as it is with listen namespaces, it literally won't get updates at all about events happening in other namespaces. With this, we do the filtering like after the fact. After we receive the update, we check if it's in the whitelist, blacklist. You see what I'm saying?
What I'm saying is a requirement from an installer perspective, and I think release representatives here.
There is another over there.
The requirement has always been that anything that is in values.yaml, either it's backward compatible or you provide a tool to migrate to whatever. In general, nobody provided tool so far, and I think it's a very high bar to provide a tool. So implementation-wise, you can do whatever you want inside, but from my concern is API stability at installer level. We just discussed in environment working group about not breaking anything that user already had run.
Okay, so the concern being if we move to this, then we don't have the listen namespaces.
No, keep whatever it is in values.yaml and change the implementation however you see fit. It's not
the housing point is what the values.yaml in the top level is what the customer is facing, and their configuration should be reflected in whatever implementation, but the same semantics under the hood of each component. Is that right?
Yeah, it is right, and I will add that right now the auto injection and other operator in particular, they all rely on values.yaml. So values.yaml is mesh config. Let's call it mesh config. Mesh config has a lot of settings that are stable and backward compatible and so forth. And different components like injector, pilot, and so forth reads those values and can be updated dynamically, operator in particular.
Right.
So if we go with this proposal, I would hope that Citadel will mount values.yaml and will read directly from there, so it gets updates and is friendly to operator and all the other stuff we are doing in installer.
Okay. So to be able to also like.
So instead of a flag, read from values.yaml directly, which is a source of truth.
Right.
Does it sound reasonable?
What's the proposal exactly? Sorry, I'm a little bit confused.
So,
I thought
the proposal here, you mean?
Yeah.
Adding another flag in the CLL.
No, not adding another flag. The proposal is to keep the whitelist as it is in values.yaml as a setting.
Yes.
Add a blacklist to satisfy the additional use cases, and then change the implementation to read from values.yaml the flags, the two new flags. So you get dynamic updates.
Yeah, but that is under the option C. So,
yeah, that's option C, no?
Yeah, that's option C. I mean,
why don't we? I'm concerned about the privilege that you need to touch about the if you wherever you want to change that flag, you need to go to Istio dash system, right?
Oh, you need to redeploy CLL, right?
No, you don't need to redeploy Citadel.
You don't need to redeploy Citadel, but you need privilege.
You need to change that configuration. You mean?
Yeah.
You need to redeploy Citadel if you're going to change CLI flags, right?
No. The proposal is to not change CLI flags, to read directly from values.yaml. So we use it as a config, mesh config. Pilot is reading mesh config directly, and it's watching for
config maps.
Yeah.
It's a config map that is reloaded in Pilot, for example. We watch the file, and when it's reloaded, we read it again.
Yeah.
Just for the record, that's not what the option says right now. This is just what we're discussing.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
My concern here is you need to have the privilege to change the config map in Istio system namespace to do that operation. But if you do let me finish.
Yeah.
If you do the labeling on the namespace, you don't need that privilege.
Yeah.
So in the multi-tenant environment, you probably want to do that. I think just change the label of the namespace is better.
I don't think option A and C are exclusive. I think A and C work well together. I mean, for C, since it's shipped already, we already have documented to the users that they can set a whitelist of namespaces. I don't think we have a choice to just remove it it's shipped in 1.2. It's features that we shipped.
I think if we had A and C together, then we'd be reintroducing the problem of having multiple ways to configure the target namespaces.
Well, if we want to break users, then it's a discussion with the release working group and I mean, again, that's
maybe there is a general discussion about having multiple ways to do things because
maybe there is, but it's also a discussion. I mean, so far from environment and install point of view, we had this requirement to not break users who upgrade.
It's an explicit goal at the top of this document that we want to retain backwards compatibility. Like we can't have our cake and eat it too. Yeah. Either we have backwards compatibility or we have multiple ways.
Yes.
Like that's just how it is.
Or third option, we can provide a migration process.
Yeah, that's the first.
A migration process is not quite the same thing as backwards compatibility.
Exactly.
It is not, but I mean, it's one option.
And to be clear, this should be justified. I mean, why what we shipped is bad, and why having the configuration option which lists what namespaces Citadel should use is broken and needs to be fixed. I think that should be a bar to break backward compatibility. It's not just because we change our mind and we want a different name. Anyway, that's my opinion from the environment hat.
So is the backwards compatibility concern just with the listen namespaces?
Whatever is in values.yaml, I don't care about the flags too much.
Well, yeah, so it's the same in the values. It's called the same.
Values.yaml is what people are using.
Okay, just trying to summarize what we got out of from the discussion. We need to maintain the backward compatibility in values.yaml, what we offer to our users to prevent the breakage during the upgrades. That implies the release namespace flags. And second, it seems like we are okay to use labels and point to different CLL instance namespace to enable both canary of the control plane and the use case listed in this documentation. Does anyone have more comments on this?
On the pointing to different citadels is different namespaces the right way to identify citadels, or are there other?
Well, why do you want to point to different citadels? I'm not clear about that.
Well, I mean, like, nominally, I don't think anybody says they want to, but we're sort of.
So the use cases are not different Citadel, well, different CAs really.
Yeah, exactly.
You should point to different instances of Citadel or different CAs, or you can specify who's managing that namespace, which CA is managing that namespace.
Right. So what's the identifier? Is it namespace? Like find a CA that's in a particular namespace, or is it like a deployment? Like what's the identifier?
For consistency with injector, right now we are using the namespace. The value is a namespace where this particular component lives. But we also want to support a URL, so you can specify a free-form HTTPS, whatever. So you can use an external injector, or maybe in this case, an external CA.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense for an injector, but not
for SDS. Think about SDS use case. In SDS use case, the namespace will not necessarily have a Citadel running locally, maybe a Citadel running in a completely different data center or managed.
Yeah. So then the URL makes more sense in this case?
Well, Citadel doesn't have any doesn't listen anywhere, so it wouldn't be a URL. It would have to be some sort of URI that we would define in some scheme.
Citadel is listening for SDS requests.
It's listening. Yeah. For SDS, you
have
for SDS, but not this controller.
But we can hijack that.
Hijack the SDS URL.
No, not necessarily. So my proposal is label should be either a namespace or a URL. So because you could have your URL all the time and use the Istio Citadel.istio system. That's fine too. But I think it's important to support the use case where for multi-cluster and other use cases. It's important to support cases where you have SDS deployed and you want the namespace to point to a central cluster or a set of central clusters that are providing the SDS server or a managed CA or whatever.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
And I also, sorry if I can also jump in, maybe the flag should not be called Citadel whatever, but should be called CA because
that's a good point.
It doesn't have to be Citadel implementation. It can be any CA provider that supports SDS.
True, like Vault or other.
Yep.
It's just a service name, I think. It's not necessarily a URL.
Sorry, we have 5 more minutes.
Let me see. What's the next one?
This one is about adding customer root CA for the jobs you are resolve.
Right, that's my one. Hi there, this is Daniel from Red Hat.
Hey Daniel, how are you?
Good.
Sorry,
sorry for waiting 55 minutes.
Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. Seems like, but if you want to, I don't know if this time is enough for you to.
I can maybe quickly explain, and I'm fine with postponing it.
Okay.
So the issue at hand is that we have a customer who are hosting their key set on a web server that is secured using a TLS certificate that is coming from their own CA. Mm-hmm. So it's obviously not. So we have in pilot, I found that we have a hard-baked set of root certificates that we trust when we resolve the JWS.
Right. Okay.
And it's obviously not in there. So I've wanted to find a way to add it in there. You can rebuild the containers, but that's not really something that a user would do. And I thought this could be a first-class citizen of the configuration because it's a valid, in my opinion at least, it's a valid use case. So I was thinking about how that could be implemented, and I looked at adding a value to the pilot, like adding a variable under pilot that would, in this case, just contain the PEM certificate because we don't have any. I mean, it's kind of related to Citadel, but Citadel obviously doesn't manage these certificates, so I was going for the quick solution. I have 2 proposals outlined how then this Helm variable would be used. As I said, I'm fine with if you guys want to look at it and we talk about it in the next meeting, that's fine with me.
Can you also look at
the proposal? That's what we're going to have to do.
Can you also look at the proposal from Phil? There is a document in I think in networking, which documents a similar problem for customizing root CAs.
Could you share that document?
Yeah, I'll look for it and add it. So we have exactly the same problem for multi-cluster and for cert rotation where we want, but he's going with a config map that is going to be defined by user and mounted the injector for the pod.
I see. Okay, I'll have a look at that.
It would be great to kind of make them aligned so we don't have two different ways to do the same thing.
To secure the web server that hosts their JWKS file to be used with their Istio policies. I'm not quite sure I follow this. Could you explain a little bit more? Maybe Yang.
So this is the JWKS is the key set that we use to validate JOTs, right? So we have a mechanism to go out and get a new key set, but you want to secure that operation of go get this key set. You want to authenticate that. And the problem is that they're using a TLS certificate to authenticate that key set. That's not just a web PKI key set. They're using their own custom CA. And so this is like the sort of validation or like the authentication of the authentication going on here, right? For JOTs. So it's kind of a global thing of like, who do you like? What CAs do you trust to serve up key sets for JOTs?
I see.
Right.
Okay. So this is a configuration for JOT validation. Am I correct?
Yes, but indirectly, right?
Getting the key for validation.
Right. Getting the key. Yes.
For bootstrapping the public key.
I see.
Yeah. So that's what's going on here.
So, Kostik, I have a question. So, what's the current guideline for adding anything to the mesh config?
So it's an API that, as we discussed earlier, we need backward compatibility seriously because many users rely on it and they're very unhappy when we break their upgrade. So yeah, we need to treat with most care. But yeah, we add stuff to mesh config and it's.
So how?
By the way, by mesh config I mean values.yaml because values is now the new mesh config really. Operator is using it as an input, installer is using it as an input. There is also the old mesh config, and we are migrating. We are kind of converging, moving them together. But we can add stuff. But in some cases, like this one, it may not be necessarily a mesh config. I mean, the proposal for multi-cluster and rotation is to use a config map or a secret, where the root CAs are used. Just like Spike was saying, this is also a case where what CA used to authenticate pilot, what CA used to authenticate other workloads. So basically a set of Citadel CAs or other CAs that are trusted in the system. JOT is just one particular case.
Oh, these CAs are shared. Yeah, I guess that makes sense if they're
container
level ones.
Yeah, in multi-cluster, we want to take all the different clusters in the multi-cluster that have Citadel installed, take all the public keys of Citadels, put them together and avoid copying the private key and having, or when you rotate certs, to keep the old private key around.
Could you, Kostin, could you share that doc?
Yeah,
or maybe you can put it into the...
Could you comment in this
I'm adding it to the comment.
Yeah, in the agenda, all right?
And the agenda, yes.
Okay, thank you. Let's follow up. Yeah, let's follow up on this item as well. Okay. Sorry for the last one. Maybe I can give you an update next meeting, and I'll follow up with you as well. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.